The first time Charlie suspected something wasn't right about her new family. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic scream in the middle of the night or a door slammed hard enough to shake the house. It was silence, an absence of warmth that hung heavy like humidity. Invisible but clawing. She was 17 when her mom remarried. They moved into his house, his meaning Alan Mercer. A man who smelled like cedarwood cologne and control. His son, Landon, had just turned 21 and was halfway through a political science degree at a nearby university. Charlie remembered thinking he looked like a campaign poster, bright smile, clean haircut, perfect teeth. Except campaign posters were made of cardboard. And Landon had the eyes of something harder, colder. Not dangerous, just unreadable. The house was too quiet for its size. 4 bedrooms. Open-plan kitchen. Granite counters nobody used. A second living room that looked like it belonged in a catalogue. Charlie often felt like a guest. No, an intruder. The Mercer home wasn't a home at all. It was a statement. Something that screamed, "Look how well I'm doing." Without making a sound. Her mother, Marla, seemed to shrink in that house. Like a balloon that had been filled too long and was finally starting to deflate. She cooked more. Smiled less. Her laughter, once loud and messy, now came out in delicate half-chuckles, always followed by a glance toward Alan. As if asking permission. Charlie noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing, not when Alan corrected her grammar at dinner like a professor giving out failing grades, not when Landon walked past her in the hallway and let his hand brush just a little too close to the small of her back. Once. Then twice. Then casually. As if it were normal. She pretended not to flinch. She told herself it's just the house, some people live differently. Maybe this was how normal, put-together families acted. But then came the birthday. It was Landon's birthday. Not hers. 22. There was no party. Just a formal dinner that Charlie's mom had orchestrated like it was a state affair. Steak. Red wine for the adults. And a cake that looked too expensive to eat. Landon wore a button-down shirt and a watch that shimmered when he moved his wrist. Charlie wore black. It wasn't intentional. She just hadn't wanted to think too hard about what to wear. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Alan turned on the fireplace, not because it was cold, but because it set the mood. Marla poured more wine. Landon opened a gift from Alan, an expensive leather-bound journal and a pen that looked like it could write contracts with blood. Charlie handed over her own gift awkwardly, a novel she loved, full of twisted characters and ambiguous endings. Landon smiled wide as he opened it. Too wide. "This is thoughtful," he said. "But I have a question. Charlie, do you relate to this protagonist?" He flipped through the book like he was looking for evidence. She blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "It's about a woman who gets manipulated by someone she trusts. Then she turns the tables. Kills him. Very girl boss." Alan chuckled. Marla gave a nervous laugh. Charlie sat very still. "I just think it's interesting, is all," Landon said, setting the book down. "You like stories about revenge?" Charlie met his eyes. "Only when it's deserved." That night, Charlie lay awake, her earbuds in, but no music playing. Just silence again. She was starting to understand something. There was a performance happening in that house. One where her mother played the role of the doting wife. Alan played the king. Landon, the prince. And she was the extra. The shadow in the corner of the stage. Always present. Never speaking. She'd begun noticing how Landon watched her. Not with curiosity. With calculation. Like she was a riddle. Or worse. A toy. One night, she caught him standing outside her room. He said he was just checking to see if the Wi-Fi was working upstairs. She didn't believe him. But still, no evidence. Nothing tangible. Just vibes. And vibes didn't count in the real world. Until the journal. One morning, Charlie's mom asked her to help clean Landon's room while he was out with friends. He was always out, always networking, always making connections. He called himself a future senator. Charlie called him a parasite. Though only in her head. She started dusting bookshelves, picking up socks. The usual. Then she saw the drawer, slightly ajar. Inside was the journal, the one Alan had gifted him. She shouldn't have looked. But she did, just a peek, just a single page. But what she saw changed everything. She thinks I don't notice how she watches me. But I see her. I always see her. She doesn't realize how vulnerable she is here. How easy it would be to twist things. How easy it would be to ruin her and still come out looking like the golden boy. Charlie slammed the drawer shut. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She left the room and never told her mom what she found. That was the moment something shifted in her. Like a seed planted in her chest. Not fear, purpose. There were two types of survivors in stories like hers, the ones who escaped. And the ones who burned the whole damn house down. She wasn't going to run. Charlie spent the following weeks feeling the walls of the house close in on her. The air in the Mercer home grew thicker. As if each passing day added a layer of tension. A quiet weight that pressed down on her chest. She could hear it in the way Alan's laugh now lingered too long when he spoke to her. The casual glint of approval in his eyes that never quite reached his smile. And Landon? He changed too, becoming more aware of her every move. His gestures more deliberate. His presence suffocating. She tried to ignore it. Tried to bury the unease deep down and pretend that everything was fine. But that was the thing about pretending, it only works until you can no longer convince yourself. Landon's behavior had shifted after the night of his birthday. He'd started to make subtle comments. Small observations about her that made her skin crawl. At dinner, he asked if she liked his new cologne. He leaned in a little too close as he said it. His voice just a bit too soft. You know, Charlie, he'd said, his lips curling into that too perfect smile. I think you're more like me than you realize. At first, she thought he was just being strange. But over time, she began to see the pattern, the careful, insidious way he was weaving a web around her. He made sure to be around when her mom wasn't home. Positioned himself in her path when she least expected it. He became the shadow that loomed at the edge of her vision. The one she couldn't shake. One afternoon, she found him in the living room, flipping through a magazine. But his eyes were on her. He didn't even pretend to look away when she caught him staring. You seem off, Charlie, he said, his voice low. Like you're hiding something. Or maybe running from something. She didn't answer. Just walked past him. Heart pounding in her chest. But Landon's words, his eyes, they lingered. Charlie had never been good at asking for help. She'd been raised to be self-reliant, to manage her own problems and never show weakness. But now, in this house, she found herself slipping. Slowly, little by little, she was losing control. Her thoughts spiraling in the direction she'd always feared, into a place where she couldn't protect herself. That evening, after dinner, she retreated to her room. The silence in the house was deafening. The kind of silence that made every small sound louder. She locked the door behind her and sat on the bed, staring at the journal she'd left on the nightstand. It was the one thing that still felt like a tether to reality, to the truth Landon had written about her in it. She was sure of it. The journal was his blueprint, his playbook for how to break her, how to manipulate the situation to his advantage. And she needed to know more. She had to read it. She had to see if she could find something that would give her power. Something she could use against him. With trembling hands, she opened the journal again. I can feel her watching me. She's waiting for something. Like a rat in a trap. Always hoping that I won't notice. She doesn't know it yet. But the game is already over. I've already won. I always do. Charlie's stomach twisted. She slammed the book shut. The sound too loud in the quiet of the room. Her breath was shallow. Her pulse racing. He knew. The next morning, Charlie woke up early. It was a Saturday, and Alan had promised to take Marla out for the day. Landon was supposed to be at a friend's house, but she knew better than to believe him. He was always around, always watching. She needed to act fast. Charlie slipped out of bed, grabbed her bag, and slipped downstairs, making her way to the kitchen. The house was still empty. Her mom hadn't even gotten up yet. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of her fear settle on her shoulders. But this time, she was ready. By noon, Landon returned. As expected, he came through the front door without any warning, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Charlie, now sitting on the couch in the living room, could hear him before he even appeared in the doorway. Hey, Charlie. Landon greeted her casually. as if there were nothing amiss between them. His voice held a strange amusement, like he was playing a game, and she was still too unaware to realize. She didn't look up. She knew better than to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "You're home early," she remarked, keeping her voice steady. "Yeah," he replied, stepping closer. "I figured I'd stay in. You know, spend some time with my favorite stepsister." Charlie froze. She hadn't realized how he'd said it, casually, as if they were close, as if they shared some unspoken bond. The word stepsister felt wrong coming from him. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, was it? Was that how he saw her? "I didn't think you liked me much," Charlie said, her voice a little too sharp. Landon smiled. "I never said I didn't like you, Charlie. I just think you're complicated." His words hung in the air, thick with a meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Charlie stood up then, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't know anything about me." "Maybe," he said, his gaze flickering with something dark. "But I think I could." Charlie didn't stay downstairs much longer. She made an excuse about needing some space and retreated to her room, locking the door behind her. Her mind raced, thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. She couldn't keep running, couldn't keep pretending. She had to confront him. But how? She sat on the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the worn edges of her phone. Her mum didn't know about any of this. Alan didn't know, but Landon did. And now that he knew, she knew. There was no going back. The first step had been taken. The game had begun. But Charlie was no longer just playing defense. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on Charlie as the days passed. Each interaction with Landon felt like an electric current, a barely contained energy crackling just beneath the surface. She could no longer ignore the fact that her life had been quietly overtaken by his manipulation. He was like a shadow that followed her every move. And no matter how she tried to hide, she knew he was always there, watching, waiting for her to slip up. But this time, she wasn't going to slip. This time, she would make sure she was the one pulling the strings. Her first step was simple: distance. She couldn't let Landon keep controlling the narrative. She couldn't let him think he could walk in and out of her life at will, leaving a trail of chaos behind him. The game needed to change, and Charlie was going to rewrite the rules. The following week, Charlie began staying at the library more often, spending long hours immersed in her schoolwork. It wasn't that she cared much about grades anymore. She was barely keeping it together in that respect, but it gave her a cover, an excuse. Whenever Landon tried to corner her, to make his presence known, she would retreat into the quiet sanctuary of the library. There, she could be anyone but the girl stuck in a house with a stepbrother who had already begun to pick apart the pieces of her life. But even that wasn't enough. Landon wasn't easily discouraged. He was always around, always showing up when she least expected it. He started appearing at the library, lingering in the stacks, his eyes always on her from a distance. At first, Charlie ignored it, but it didn't take long for her to realize he was trying to provoke her. He wanted her to break, to show some sign of weakness, to give him the opportunity to push her further. But she had learned something in these last few weeks. She wasn't as vulnerable as she had once been. She had the advantage, because while Landon was fixated on her, Charlie was paying attention to him, studying his every move. She had to outsmart him. Charlie was sitting at a table, her textbooks spread out in front of her, when Landon appeared in the aisle just beyond her peripheral vision. She didn't look up as he stopped next to her, his presence undeniable. "Hard at work, huh?" Landon's voice was smooth, casual, as if they were simply two classmates exchanging pleasantries. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a pencil, tapping it against the table, letting the moment hang in the air for just a few beats longer than necessary. Then, without looking up, she said, "I'm trying to focus. Is there something you need?" Landon smiled, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He leaned in a little closer, just enough to make her uncomfortable. "You know, Charlie, I've been thinking a lot about our little conversations." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't want to give him any more of her attention than she had to, but she knew that every word, every glance, every interaction with him was a part of this twisted game he was trying to play. "Conversations?" she repeated flatly. Trying to keep her voice as disinterested as possible, he sat down across from her without asking. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoing in her ears. You really think you're so much smarter than me, don't you? Like you're the one in control. Charlie's grip tightened around the pencil. She had to stay calm. Had to make him think she was still unaware. Still too naive to understand his true intentions. I don't think about it that much. Landon leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. You should. Because I know things, Charlie. Things you don't even realize I know. Her pulse quickened. But she kept her expression neutral. Her gaze focused on the textbooks in front of her. Like what? He smiled again. That cold, calculated smile that made her skin crawl. You're not as clever as you think. You know. I know you've been avoiding me. You think you can just disappear. Get away from me? It's cute. But it's also a waste of time. Charlie forced herself to breathe. She could feel the words hanging in the air, thick with unspoken threats. She wasn't sure how much longer she could play this game. How long could she keep pretending that everything was fine when she knew the truth? When she knew exactly what he was capable of. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady. I'm not avoiding you. I'm just choosing not to engage. Landon's eyes narrowed. And for a moment, Charlie thought he might actually lose his composure. But then, just as quickly, his smile returned. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a sharp screech. We'll see about that. You'll come around, Charlie. You always do. He turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there, heart racing, mind spinning. But there was something about the way he'd said it, something about the finality of his words, that sent a chill down her spine. He was underestimating her, and she wasn't about to let him win. The following days were a blur of strategy. Charlie continued to withdraw, continuing her act of indifference. But in her mind, she was always 2 steps ahead, mapping out the moves she needed to make to gain the upper hand. She began to keep track of Landon's routine, when he left for his friend's house, when he was home, what time he usually took his showers. It was subtle, this game of surveillance, but it was giving her the intel she needed. Charlie knew she couldn't continue to play defensively. She had to shift the game. She had to take control. The next step was obvious. She needed to make Landon think he was the one in charge all the while, pulling the strings behind the scenes. By the end of the week, the opportunity presented itself. Landon was at home, and Charlie had just finished a long day at the library. She knew he'd be hanging around, waiting for her to return so he could corner her once more. But this time, she wasn't going to be alone when it happened. Charlie's heart was pounding as she stood in the hallway, just outside the door to the living room. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. Landon had to be somewhere nearby, and she could already feel the familiar tension creeping through her chest. The sense of waiting, like a predator stalking its prey. But Charlie wasn't prey anymore. She was ready. The plan she'd devised in the past few days was risky, but it was her only option. She had to make Landon believe that he had the upper hand, that he was controlling the game, when in reality, she was setting him up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend. Maya, you good? Need me to come over? Charlie quickly typed back a response, stay close. I'll let you know when it's time. Then, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and took a deep breath. This was it. She had to make sure that everything went according to plan. If Landon didn't buy it, she was in deeper trouble than she realized. But if she could pull this off. She pushed open the door to the living room. Landon was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone as if he didn't have a care in the world. His eyes flicked up when he heard her enter, a smirk immediately forming on his face. Well, he drawled. You finally decided to come back. I was starting to think you might just disappear for good. He leaned back, watching her carefully, as if waiting for her to make a mistake. Charlie forced a smile, trying to sound nonchalant. Had a long day at the library. I don't exactly have a lot of time for you right now, Landon. His smirk deepened. That's cute. You really think you can just shut me out, don't you? Charlie crossed the room slowly, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her as she tried to act casual, but inside, Her mind was racing. Every move she made had to be calculated. Every word had to land just right. "I don't think I'm shutting you out," Charlie said, keeping her voice level. "I'm just focusing on what actually matters." Landon's expression hardened for a moment. But then he laughed. A sharp, mocking sound that sent chills down her spine. "And what exactly matters to you, Charlie? Because if it's running away from your problems, I don't think that's going to work. Not with me around." Charlie fought the urge to roll her eyes. She needed him to believe that his words were affecting her, that he was winning. So, she lowered her gaze for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to give him the satisfaction he wanted. "Maybe you're right," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "Maybe I've been running, but only because I don't want to deal with someone like you anymore." Landon's brow furrowed slightly, the hint of confusion flickering in his eyes. But the smirk didn't fade. He wasn't going to let her off so easily. "You don't think I know what you're doing? You think I don't see the game you're playing?" Charlie leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if confiding in him. "You're right. I've been playing a game. But you're not the one in control anymore." For a moment, Landon seemed taken aback, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But only for a moment. He quickly recovered, standing up and turning toward her, his posture brimming with arrogance. "You think you can turn this around? You think you can beat me at my own game? That's cute." Charlie stood up too, matching his posture. Her heart was still pounding, but now it was in anticipation. The pieces were almost in place. "You're not in control," she repeated, her voice a little sharper now. "You've never been in control. And I'm done letting you think you are." Landon was about to respond when the doorbell rang, interrupting the tension. Both of them froze for a moment, and Charlie seized the opportunity. "Perfect timing," she said, heading toward the door. Landon watched her with narrowed eyes, but it didn't try to stop her. When she opened the door, Maya stood there with a look of concern on her face, as though she could sense the danger lurking just beneath the surface. Charlie gave her a small, reassuring smile and stepped aside. "Hey, what's going on?" Maya asked in a low voice as she entered the house, casting a glance at Landon, who was still standing in the living room, watching them both. "I'll explain in a second," Charlie whispered back. "Just stay close." Maya didn't need any more instructions. She knew the plan. She'd been briefed just enough. They both turned to face Landon, who seemed to grow more tense by the second. "Landon," Charlie began, her tone now firm, "I think you've overstayed your welcome. You're not going to manipulate me anymore. And I'm done playing this game." Landon laughed, but it wasn't the same confident laugh as before. This time, there was something shaky about it, something that made Charlie's spine straighten with certainty. He didn't know what was coming. "You really think you can just talk to me like that?" he asked, his voice lowering into a dangerous growl. "You think I'm going to let you walk away from this unscathed?" But Charlie wasn't intimidated. She'd come prepared. "No, I don't think that," she said evenly. "But I do think you're about to realize you've made a huge mistake." She gave Maya a quick nod, and that was all the cue Maya needed. In one fluid motion, Maya pulled out her phone and held it up. Landon's eyes widened in confusion as Maya showed him the screen. There, in black and white, was proof of what he had been doing, what he had been texting her, what he had been saying to her in private conversations. All the manipulative words and threats. Landon's face went pale as he took in the images, the messages, the proof that he was the one who had been crossing the line. "This is why you're done," Charlie said, her voice steady. "You're finished." Landon opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He looked back at Charlie, his expression twisted with a mix of disbelief and rage. "You think this is over?" he finally spat. But Charlie stood her ground. "You think I'll let you get away with this?" Charlie wasn't afraid anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," she said with conviction. "But you? You're about to find out what happens when you push someone too far." Landon stood there, his chest rising and falling as his mind raced. The shock of seeing his own actions laid bare on the screen was enough to rattle him. But the calmness in Charlie's eyes, the certainty with which he spoke, was something he hadn't anticipated. He had expected fear, guilt, maybe even a little remorse. But instead, He was met with a person who had clearly made peace with what needed to be done. "You really think you've won, don't you?" Landon sneered, stepping toward her with a look of pure malice. "This isn't over. You think I'll just walk away because you've got a few screenshots?" Charlie remained unmoved. She stood firm, her back straight, her hands by her sides. She was ready. "This isn't about winning. It's about finally standing up for myself. I'm done letting you control my life, Landon. It ends here." Maya stepped forward, standing beside Charlie now. The two of them a united front. She had witnessed enough, and she knew the stakes. She wasn't about to let Landon have another opportunity to manipulate or intimidate her friend. Landon, now desperate, shifted his weight, looking between them both, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You really think anyone is going to believe you over me? Do you think anyone will care about your little threats and texts? You're just some girl trying to ruin me." Charlie's eyes didn't waver. "You've already ruined yourself, Landon, and I've spent too long hiding in your shadow, letting you get away with it. No one cares about your lies anymore. You can't scare me, and you won't control me." His lips twitched as if he were considering something, his mind working quickly. Then, with a low growl, he backed away, his hands balled into fists at his sides. But Charlie could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He wasn't the invincible figure he once thought he was. He was unraveling, and she could feel it. "I'll make sure this doesn't end like you think it will," Landon muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll make you regret this." But Charlie simply shook her head. "You already made that mistake the day you started harassing me. The moment you decided I was someone you could control. You sealed your fate." Without another word, Landon turned and stormed out of the house, his footsteps heavy and echoing in the silence that followed. Charlie stood in the doorway for a moment, her breath catching as she realized the confrontation was over. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had control over her life again. It wasn't just about exposing his lies or showing the world what he'd done, it was about reclaiming her power. She turned to Maya, who was watching her with a proud smile on her face. "You did it," Maya said softly. Charlie nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. "We did it. I couldn't have done it without you." Maya stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her friend in a tight hug. "I'm always here for you, Charlie. Always." As they stood there, in the calm after the storm, Charlie finally felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The fear, the constant anxiety, the oppressive dread, it was all gone. She had faced her abuser, confronted her past, and come out stronger for it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Charlie felt ready to face it head-on. With Maya by her side and a newfound sense of self-worth, she was prepared for whatever came next. Epilogue. Months passed. The legal process had been long, but Charlie's courage had paid off. Landon had tried to fight back, of course, but the evidence was irrefutable. He had been forced to face the consequences of his actions, and although it hadn't been easy, Charlie had seen it through to the end. Her life was beginning to settle into a new rhythm, one that was no longer dictated by fear or manipulation. She had reclaimed her narrative, and it felt like the first step towards something better. Charlie had started to attend therapy, where she slowly began to untangle the emotional scars Landon had left behind. She wasn't healing in a straight line, but each day she felt a little stronger, a little more like herself. She was determined to build a future free from the shadow of the past. And every once in a while, when she saw a new sunrise, Charlie would smile to herself, knowing that she had taken her power back. Landon was no longer a part of her life. His reign of terror had ended. And in the end, that was all that mattered.